All right, we're back with part 3. So this is the concept of experiencing, the concept of congruence reformulated in terms of experiencing. And I'm just gonna keep going. I'm not gonna. I started recording this earlier and then I got cut off. So I'm not gonna try to say what I said already. But I'll just start by reading this paragraph to lead into the next section. So, I propose, therefore, to define experiencing so that the definition may function as a theoretical construct. However, our definition will profit from our naturalistic observations. The theory stands a much better chance of leading to significant research if it is the best possible conceptualization of our naturalistic observations. So, the project here, we're trying to come up with, or Gendlin is trying to conceptualize experiencing to the point where we can use it in theory to then build further theory onto, use it in clinical contexts, in therapeutic contexts, as a tool, basically, with which to improve our ability to observe. So, here we go. Theoretical definition of experiencing. 1. Experiencing is an organismic process. The term process refers to a certain pattern of logical relationships which a theory may impose upon events. When some area of observation is called a process, it is considered as follows. A process is a chain of events. At any one moment, some events are present. Their present characteristics and organization depend upon previous events in the chain and imply or dynamically tend toward future events. The next moment will be a somewhat different organization of somewhat different events, yet the organization which will include relationships to the earlier events. Similarly, the earlier moment will, in its own organization, include implications, tendencies, dynamic relationships to the later moment. Thus, in anything termed process, there is always a concrete present datum which contains dynamic relationships of past, present, and future events. Okay, that was kind of dense. Or just very theoretical, definitional. In anything termed process, there is always a concrete present datum which contains dynamic relationships of past, present, and future events. Yes, okay, so it's a thing, one specific piece of data that contains dynamic, as in like moving relationships to what came before, what's happening now, and what's coming in the future. There is a progression implied and a journey implied. Like looking backwards, you can talk about where the pattern and the process has come from and how it's developed to this point and where it will go from here. A chain of events, right? A chain. Chain is obviously a metaphor here to talk about the way in which events are related to each other, that they are connected in pretty much connected, as the links of a chain are connected. You can't really split them apart. You have to cut them. So they follow one after another. Chain links. The events are the links of a chain. So, yeah, process, pattern, the logical relationships, right? That's kind of what makes them a chain, is that they are so tightly related to each other, each event. But it's an imposed thing, right? A theory imposes it upon events. So that would be kind of referring back to his process model talk about these theories are things that we have in our intellects, and we impose them upon what we observe, thereby organizing and conceptualizing and shaping what we observe. But they're not necessarily there in what we observe. So the theory shapes what we're seeing into this tightly connected chain, logically connected chain of events. They're not just random. Okay, so it is useful to apply the term and the logic of process to the organism. Biology and physiology conceive of the organism as a process. And we've done that in earlier papers. The process concept of relationship, talking about what's going on in the therapy room between a client and the therapist when we think of a human being as a process. How does therapy work when we are processes all the way down to a cellular level, even below that? So then B, experiencing is an organismic process. It is either the total organismic process or some sub-process in it. Subjective and physiological events are one process which we term organism. Unless a psychological theory would wish to deal with ghosts, it must in some way assume that subjective events are aspects of the organismic process. Experiencing is defined as an organismic process, including both physiological and subjective aspects. So, subjective, right? So basically like phenomenological, right? He talks about that earlier, maybe right at the beginning. Phenomena. He mentions the phenomenal field. I forget where. Anyway, but subjective, I think, is pointing at that, the phenomenal field, right? So the things that we can be aware of in our experience, and then on a more objective level, the physiological processes that are going on within us, right? So the things that we are aware of and the objective physiology of us together is our human. What we are, we're an animal, an organism that is aware of stuff. The subjective aspect of experiencing is the moment-to-moment feeling process to which an individual can directly refer. Oh, there, he says it right there. The subjective aspect of experiencing is the moment-to-moment feeling process to which an individual can directly refer in his phenomenal field. Yeah. Right. If you turn your awareness inward and you notice, this is, I mean, in many ways, this is what interoception is, right? The interoceptive faculty, the interoceptive sense, is turning your attention inward and being able to notice the moment-by-moment sensation of what's going on in one's body. Okay. Experiencing is pre-conceptual. Experiencing is not composed of given discrete events. If all events in the organism which have affected and now affect the present organization were separately defined, a vast number of discrete events would have to be defined. Furthermore, there is no criterion for what is a discrete event, or what had better be considered 2 or 17 events. Therefore, we must conclude that the cognitive operation of separating and defining different aspects of experience is a further production, not a report of what is already given. We cannot posit one set of defined and discrete experiences in the individual. Any one present subjective datum is amenable to many different cognitive discriminations. Since the organism is a highly organized process, a moment's feeling is not completely indeterminate, but neither is it a defined content. It is distinguishably different from other feelings and meanings, so that the cognitive operation of defining it is not random. Yet such defining is not a mere reading of given discrete contents. The feeling process is not given in terms of conceptual entities. Experiencing is pre-conceptual. Okay, so just in a nutshell, so that which we are aware of, those, right, the moment by moment feeling process, right? If we can talk about each moment as a sort of event, each feeling that we notice moment by moment as a sort of event, those are not discrete. They don't exist as already defined and articulate. And we could spend our lifetime breaking apart an experience and an event in a million different ways. Right? We can talk about an event in terms of a time unit. Right? 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour. We can, if you were to talk about this thing, this experience that you had yesterday, how do you define the beginning and end of that experience? There's no absolute way to do that. You can tell the story in a million different ways. The concept is something that we put on to the experience, cognitive discriminations, right? Cutting up and putting lines around experience cognitively. So, while many psychological concepts refer to formulated and defined aspects of subjectivity, for example, anxiety, ego, depression, none as yet refers to the subjectively received datum, which is only felt, not as yet cognitively defined. Experiencing is that preconceptual felt datum. It is the moment-to-moment feeling process to which an individual can refer directly in his own phenomenal field. For the most part, it is preconceptual and felt, rather than conceptually known by the individual. Again, so this is Gendlin's thing, that we haven't had a term, we haven't had a concept for what he's speaking about here, experiencing. Experiencing is that concept, is that term that he's bringing to bear, creating, so that we can talk about this thing that we haven't yet had a way of talking about. Even though we've been able to be aware of it, we can point to it, we haven't had a stable way of talking about it. We have not yet had a term to refer to the subjectively received datum, which is only felt and not as yet cognitively defined. The felt sense, that murky edge of our awareness. Okay, so 3. Experiencing implicitly contains a complex organization which functions in the present. A moment's experiencing is a unity which includes complexity. Earlier, I cited the naturalistic observation that a moment's feeling can be differentiated into many meanings, attitudes, and other psychological data. The older psychology applies the logic of things in space to such data. These discrete data are posited in the individual. The subjective feeling, which implicitly contains all this data, is ignored by such a theory. The things or data in the individual are considered to be repressed until he can define them. Such a theory does not make clear how and in what form all these many discrete data can be present in the individual. Yeah, so the logic of things in space, right? So we talk about our experience as a thing in us, the things that we're aware of as things in us, not as things in process, but as bits of data of which we are just a collection, right? A big bag of data, a big bag of contents. That's Gendlin's thing too, is we are not contents, we are interactions. So yeah, what he's pointing out here is that when we are conceiving of ourselves as contents or big bags of data, if that data is not in our awareness, or if it's not something that we can yet talk about, it's repressed. It's in the shadow, so to speak. I will say I use that very casually because I haven't read Jung. So I'm just going off a very, very, very casual understanding of shadow. For example, it is often said that past experiences function in the perception of a present situation. In what form are such past experiences present now so that they might influence present perception? Experiencing is defined so as to answer this question. The many past experiences are implicitly present in a moment's feeling process. One subjectively felt datum implicitly contains very many discriminable aspects. So, yeah, we talk about that a lot, like traumas, past experiences, they shape how we perceive our situations now, right? If we get triggered, we kind of like go blind to the present moment, and some people talk about it as if you're just like seeing an old situation play out in front of you, and then you're just reacting to the old situation, right? But the question is like, what actually is happening in that moment? Like, what's happening in a phenomenological sense, right? And then what's happening like in an objective psychological sense, a somatic sense, physiological sense. Gendlin is pointing out that past experience exists in us as in the somatic way. It's implicitly present in our feeling process. In this moment, the way I feel is colored by and shaped by and has our past experience implicitly present in it, right? And then if we go do that whole focusing thing of getting even more aware of that felt datum moment by moment, we can then cognitively discriminate all sorts of things, right? That's what you can do in focusing. Be like, oh, I have this felt sense. What is it? What does it bring up for me? Like, And it could lead you to talking about and reflecting back on old experiences, right? That's one thing that is implicit in a felt sense, or could be implicit in a felt sense, and you could go down that rabbit hole. So if we define experiencing as an organismic process, we can view a moment's experiencing as containing the complex organization of the organismic process. A moment's organismic process is not an experience. It is always experiencing. That is to say, a process containing complex, dynamic relationships of many events. Yeah. Right. A moment's, the process that is going on in a moment is not an experiencing. It is ongoing. Right? It's not an object. It's always in process. It's always going on. It's in flow. It is moving, and it contains, remember he defined process earlier as that chain of events, right? So chain, like where each moment contains dynamic relationships to the past, the present, and the future event. So each moment contains those relationships, those complex relationships, and moving relationships to other moments. Subjectively, also, a moment's feeling implicitly contains very many relationships of past, future, and external events. Feeling is not like a thing in space. It is better defined as a process of organized dynamic relationships. It includes interactions organized by past biological and symbolic conditioning, which now function in an organized dynamic tending toward further events. Therefore, a moment's subjectively felt experiencing can be differentiated as many patterns, attitudes, relationships, implications, ideas, and emotions. Yet it can be one momentarily felt subjective referent, right? What was the heading on this? Or where did he say it's a unity which includes complexity, right? It can be felt as one whole thing, right? Our felt sense right now in this moment, and yet it's infinitely intricate, and we can discriminate it in all sorts of ways, right? As he says here, patterns, attitudes, relationships, implications, etc. There was a connection I wanted to make with other things I've seen him say. Oh yeah, feeling is not like a thing in space, right? He talks about this, I think it was in the process concept of relationship, talking about how the feeling inside, or like how the other person in the therapy room, right, the therapist, can, by their presence and their way of engaging with the client, stop or facilitate the flow of experience in the client, right? And so he talks about feeling being like the beginning, or the client side part of the flow of expression. So you have feeling, which flows into expressive action, and if that expressive action is then kind of like received in the other person, there's a flow there. But if the expressive action can't even occur, right, if you can't speak, if you can't emote or move your body in whatever way that actually is an expression of the feeling, then that flow is stopped. And that can happen for all sorts of reasons. But a feeling is not a thing. A feeling is part of a process. Okay, 4. Integration of experience is a function of experiencing. As we have seen, any moment's subjectively felt referent implicitly contains very many aspects which function to determine perception. I would like now to add that their functioning is an integrative one. Integrative. Present perception is not determined by past experiences that function one after the other. The many past experiences function simultaneously as an integrated, presently felt context. Furthermore, the present functioning is also a further integrating of present events and perceptions. In this functioning, implicit aspects of present feeling are modified and modify each other. A new perception modifies the total context of past experience, implicitly present and felt. In the same process, this new perception becomes modified and integrated into the total context which is presently being felt. Hence, the integration of experience lies in the ongoing functioning of the many implicit aspects of present feeling. So, the way that our past experience exists in us is that it has shaped us in various ways, right? It has shaped how we think, it's shaped how we feel, it's shaped our body, it's shaped our actions and behaviors and our habits, and all of that stuff, and the felt sense of all of that together is the context within which we exist and perceive every moment, right? And then each moment adds to that. Each moment happens, and then it goes into the past, and it becomes part of that. Everything, Gendlin has that term that he introduces in the process model, ev, everything by everything. The everything that has ever happened exists in us in that implicit way. It is the context for our present experience. So every new moment, every new action, every new anything becomes integrated into that everything, out of which everything else flows. A theoretical definition of integration must view it as a function of the ongoing subjective and organismic process. Theoretical definition of integration must view integration as a function of the ongoing. Integration is a function of the ongoing subjective and organismic process. We cannot define integration as static relationships between infinitely numerous experience. Let us instead define it as a function of the experiencing process. The living body interacts with the environmental events which thereby become part of a dynamic organization we call organism. The integration of the organism lies in this ongoing functioning. The organism remains integrated only as the functioning continues. Its integration is the dynamic organization of this functioning. Thus, from the organismic point of view, integration must be defined as a function of the ongoing process, right? So we live and we engage with our environment, and there's this dynamic organization of our organism, right? So if I if I stub my toe, then there's a dynamic organization that's constantly happening, right? My body responds and my mind responds. I respond as an organism to the way in which I have just interacted with the environment. Interacted, right? He hyphenates that. Action between body and environment. We act we act into environment, and environment acts into us, and it's a symbiotic, that's probably the wrong word, but like back and forth interaction always. And if it's not, then we are no longer functioning, right? Because even if we're lying down and just meditating and breathing, we are interacting with the environment. I mean, let alone having interaction within ourselves, right? If we're just laying there breathing, we're taking in air and our lungs are expanding and we're breathing back into the air around us, and so we're interacting in that way. But let's say we held our breath. If we're still alive, we still have a heartbeat, there's still interaction happening within our body, there's still, like microscopic, our skin is still porous, there's still some way in which our body is having that interaction with the environment, even if we can't see it. So, integration of experience involves the presence, functioning, and mutual modification of experiences. The process of experiencing, as here defined, accounts for these three essentials of integration. The many implicit aspects of a moment's feeling are integrated insofar as the process of feeling them is ongoing. If they were considered to be discrete contents, their integration would be a mystery. As implicit in an ongoing process, many aspects can be present, functioning, and mutually modifying. That is to say, they can be integrated aspects of the dynamic process organization. Thus, the feeling process integrates the presently functioning, implicitly felt aspects. It is a continuous integrating process. In summary, experiencing is defined as an organismic process felt from moment to moment as a preconceptual, implicitly manifold, and integrative direct referent. So I think there was something in here that I wanted to point out or understand better. Yeah. The many implicit aspects of a moment's feeling are integrated insofar as the process of feeling them is ongoing. Right. So if we're feeling it, we are integrating it. Or if, the process of feeling them is ongoing. The feeling them is the integration, basically. I wonder about things that we don't feel, or like I don't know, what am I trying to point out? Like, because he talks about how the intricacy of our raw experiencing can be, infinitely discriminated, right? And you can go in further and notice in finer detail what that experience is like, what that feeling is like. Right, so just like when we first put our attention on it, we don't feel, in a sense we feel everything. We feel it all at once as a unity, an intricate, complex unity, right? But there's further nuance and there's further detail and intricacy that we could experience if we paid closer attention. But I guess it is all there in a way in the moment. So as long as we're feeling, then that entire complex intricacy is being integrated, even if there is more detail to be explored. But what would it look like? I wonder for him, what would it look like to not integrate an experience. Right? Like, what does it mean for the process of feeling to not be ongoing? Assuming you're alive, what does it mean for the process of feeling to not be going on? I'm not sure. I guess that, the first thing it makes me think is the other paper I was referring to about the process concept of relationship, where if the feeling and the expressive action, if that whole flow is blocked, then the feeling it's not being felt, really. So, right, that process is stopped. It's not ongoing, and so it's not being integrated. And I guess that's what it means then with or potentially that's what focusing is about. It's like, because focusing is about focusing whether by yourself or with somebody who is enabling you to express fully, it is a situation in which you are integrating as much as you possibly can, because you are feeling things all the way through. You're paying really close attention to them, and you're expressing them, and you're being allowed to express them. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. So, yeah. Next, we'll get into part 3. So if you watch this, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Later.